It was 1968. It was a really cruel year for a lot of people. I was one of 2 million 20-year-olds being flushed through the draft system in the United States as the war in Vietnam was ramping up. It proved to be a rite of passage for many people of that generation. How was I prepared for that? I was a humanities major in college. I studied the great ideas and debated them. Things like, what is the ideal society? What is morally good? What's the meaning of life? Even, what's a just war? In order to try to put into practice some of the ideals that I was taught, I went into John Kennedy's Volunteers in Service to America, and I worked in the Afro-American ghetto of North Philadelphia for a year, living and helping families there do everything under the sun, fumigating their apartments and tenements, tutoring their children, driving them to appointments, helping them get jobs, whatever I could possibly do. But the war was going on, and I wanted to circle back into some of the ideals that I had gained through life. Growing up Christian, I knew about the sixth commandment, thou shalt not kill. And the church that I went to taught you that that had something to do with holding each life sacred, and that each life contained within it a soul, actually contained a soul. And the code that you practiced for that was nonviolence. The other thing that I had learned was from college, and it was that to obey without consent is another form of slavery that was called conformity. And it was a virtue to resist conforming as much as you possibly could. Well, those two principles put me at odds with my draft board. So when I met with my draft board, as everybody resisting induction had to do, it was an interesting experience. You would think I would remember every question they asked me about my principles and every single answer I gave. I can't remember any of that. All I can remember is their indifference to me. And in my arrogance, I didn't see them as the people who had saved democracy from imperialism and fascism in World War II. I saw them as old men doing what old men had always done in the history of our species, protecting their authority and property by sacrificing young men. And so my convictions hardened as I sat there with them. And I said to myself, I will not let them tell me what to do. So I continued my appeal process with them. Now my family, to them, the words conscientious objector were just synonymous with cowardice. But 1968 was a really cruel year for people who tried to live by their principles. I remember the places. We were driving through Sequoia National Park when we heard the news. A madman had assassinated Reverend King. That was April 4th. June 6th, I was woken up by our radio alarm, and it was playing the Byrds' Turn, Turn, Turn. I know most of you don't know the song. It quotes Ecclesiastes, and it says, to every season, to everything there is a season, and to every purpose there is a time under the sun for it to happen. And then they announced that Robert Kennedy had been assassinated by a madman. Well, those two men had been guides to us. They were really, in many respects, our elders. They had called us to act from nonviolence, to express ourselves with a depth of character that we were unfamiliar with, to honor other people and to respect others with equality. With them, we lost our innocence, we lost our aim, We lost our ideals, and we lost our authenticity. We were hollowed out. Most of my process of applying for a conscientious objector was done alone. It was only later I found out that there were 171,000 men who became conscientious objectors pretty much alone. And behind all of that was a single simple idea that all the geniuses that were running our world at the time, it escaped them. And it was that each life is sacred, and within that life is a soul. Well, I'm 50 years away from that boy. Okay? I see things gray now. I've lost some of my vision. But I remember how he felt about it. And it was like this. If you've been in the woods or you have a backyard with trees, at some point you've seen a hatchling on the ground, a little bird without feathers, and all you can do is pick it up. You don't know what to do. It's ungainly, it's vulnerable, but still there's a thread of life in it. You're puzzled. Well, what do I do now? And then you hear a voice. And it's a voice that sounds like it knows better than you do. And it tells you, just squeeze. Could you do it? Just squeeze until there's nothing left. Remember, this boy was a conscientious objector. Could you do it 2 million times for every civilian who lost their life in Vietnam? Could you do it 1 million times for every young Vietnamese soldier? Or what if you had a really good friend who's died and you just weren't done knowing him yet or her yet, and you pray to God 58,820 times that he'll come back. 1 time for every American soldier that was killed in Vietnam. When would you ever stop praying for that life or for those lives? Think of it. All those spirits not fully formed yet. All those spirits not ready when their bodies were ruptured and their rite of passage suddenly ended. Remember this, when you look at yourself closely, you'll see that you're hardwired to contend, to react, that you're hardwired to blame, maybe even to punish. But I urge you to look even closer, because always within yourself you have a heart, and that heart is always able to respond from conscience. Thank you, Toastmasters, for your patience. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Wow, what can we say? We have Twins' Animal House story, his own personal Animal House story. And then we have, on this side over here, we have Vince's and what it was like to live in the 60s. Yeah. I personally enjoy stories like this because these stories are amazing. Every generation looks at, when they're young, they look at everything like their way is correct. Their way is the way it is. Your speech, your opening remarks about how you looked at the draft board as old men who were World War II veterans who saved Europe from fascism, Nazism, is exactly the way my generation looked at you, Vince, your generation. We looked at your generation as being outdated and old-fashioned. That's just a principle of use and the way it is. It will be that way all the way down for the rest of everybody's life. So you brought up a very, very valid point in your speech about how youth looks at the older generation. I am now the old man.
I second that.
Things that I liked in your speech. I loved your story of the gray bird, holding it in your hand and squeezing 2 million times for every soldier that was killed, Vietnamese soldier that was killed. That's impressive. That got me thinking immediately and saying to myself, wow, I cannot even fathom. I cannot even fathom snuffing out a life of a bird, let alone 2 million of them. That was a very powerful moment in your speech. The other thing I really loved about your speech was your crackling voice. We started out with twins' laughter and ended with a somber note where there was some crackling in your voice. And that really amplified your speech and how, and gave it its somber sort of mood, which it really was a somber speech. And I think that was your intention too. So, as we, very great speech, Vince, very powerful. You had a great message behind it, and we will look forward to the next one next week, right? This evaluator.